It's like you've been 2 minutes late then. I know. I slipped right past me.
You were waiting for me.
Brenda and Sandy there. But here we are. Okay, so have you started the video?
Yep, we are good to go.
Okay. Following the agenda, which admittedly is an attempt to improve on the initial agenda that was sent out through Randy by Susan. Thank you very much for turning that. There were a lot of things that we talked about last meeting that were not on the agenda. So in an attempt to improve that, I put this out. It is not sacred nor cast in concrete. So unless there's any other thing, we'll just go ahead and simply civil with each other as mentioned earlier. And if there's any changes we need to make, so be it. Otherwise, welcome. Today is March 8th, 2023. The Budget Review Subcommittee. And like everybody is welcome. Let's do a quick roll call. I'm Doug Anderson. Say your name. Clark Jensen. Bill Swanson. Ben Willis. Randy Wynn.
Brenda Ashdown, Andy Cochran.
Chris Bolger. And a few folks that are in the audience there, would you mind? Who are you? I'm Dave Espinosa. Dave Espinosa, welcome, Dave.
Christy Morgan.
Christy Morgan, welcome.
Katie Gerard.
Katie Gerard, welcome. And
John Call.
behind the screen.
Yeah, I'll slide over. I'm John Call.
That's it. All right. Okay, I have a thought. And I would like to do a short invocation as well. This time, not needing to set the pattern, but here we go. It has been said that when money talks, people listen. So pass this around.
Wait,
They're to go all the way around and come back to me. While that's being passed around, I'm going to read part of what Benjamin Franklin, whose picture is on one of those.
One of them is gone.
Part of the only part, I timed myself yesterday, 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I think that was a little long, so I'm just going to read part. But please pay attention to what is being said here. Benjamin Franklin said this to George Washington on Thursday, June 28th of 1787, approximately 3 months before the Constitution was approved. Skipping down, but he said, Mr. President, him talking to him, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understandings. In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for the divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. To that kind providence, we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend, or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings that except the Lord build, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our little partial local interests. Our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach and a byword down to future age. And what is worse, mankind may hereafter from this unfortunate instance despair of establishing governments by human wisdom and leave it to chance, war, and conquest. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy of this city be requested to officiate in that service. So.
Never heard that. That's great.
I can send you the link. It's a quote that I am familiar with, which is why I found it. It has to do with why the next item on the agenda is an invocation. Unless someone else would like to offer an invocation, I will do so. Any volunteers? I promise I'll keep it shorter than the thought. Our Father in heaven, we are thankful for this chance that we have to gather together to assemble peaceably to discuss the affairs of our city. Thankful for this opportunity and pray that we might have mutual understanding on how to carry this out. And we pray this in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Pledge. Ben, since you're closest, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Sure.
Please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. As Sandy pointed out in her email, we really don't need to rehearse the minutes from last week. But I think we would do well to recognize the fact that they were put out. And thank you very much for doing that. And just a simple question, are there any additions or corrections that are needed to what Sandy did? Thank you. Simple as that. In all the good meetings, they do a quick review of the last meeting like that. Okay, next. I have a favor to ask. There is one person that is being excluded from this meeting because he cannot be here, and he told us that way back when we decided on this meeting, on this meeting date. And I would like to please reconsider the day on which we do it, so that it's either a Monday, a Tuesday, a Thursday, or a Friday.
I would say let's rule out Tuesday since that's city council night, and
I can't Fridays or Tuesdays.
yeah, I think Tuesday we shouldn't.
Agreed.
Okay.
Any other opinions, votes, suggestions? That would leave Monday or not Tuesday or not, is it Friday?
On Fridays.
That would be Thursday or Monday. Fridays would be out. So either a Monday or a Thursday, same time, I think is appropriate.
And some Thursdays, they use this room in the afternoon, so Monday might be the best option.
As I recall, that was kind of our second choice here a couple of meetings ago. So out of consideration for this one person who currently is being excluded, and I just feel for the one guy who can't come.
Why did we choose Wednesdays if he couldn't come?
I haven't reviewed the videos, but I think it was because a couple people over here, Susan Nance, and somebody couldn't come, and they haven't come anyway. So it's like, let's reconsider. I think that was it.
I thought the majority could come on Wednesday.
Jamie down here.
That's maybe.
Jamie's right here.
Yeah, I could do Mondays, but this isn't. We went with majority and I believe it was Wednesday.
And so Tuesdays, if the goal is to keep this to a 2-hour meeting, then we'll be done by 5 and we're not gonna run into council meeting anyways.
Tuesday
No.
could be, but it kind of adds a lot of things to one day, which
I can't do Tuesdays.
I'm. Okay, so Tuesday is an absolute not
I
for you.
cannot do Tuesdays.
Is there anybody who literally could not do a Monday.
Besides Jamie.
With all due respect and consideration, it's more than due.
Unless you move
So
the time.
you wanted the answers, he's the finance director. I can understand when they ask your questions. Yes,
Why
yes,
did you
but,
pick Wednesday the first?
yes, but
Unless you
Jamie,
move the time.
What time can you?
I have to leave by 3.
Oh,
So we'd have to do it by 1 at least. 'Cause it takes-
is there anyone who could not do a Monday at 1?
Bill has a job.
I am.
I have a job.
Yeah, that's mine.
Which,
Late-
same
late-
here.
Late in the day.
This is a little bit of a sacrifice, but
And about Thursdays. Are you available Thursdays?
What did,
If I might-
John just say?
Oh, some Thursdays, they're using this, they're already.
The youth city council and our youth court use this room on
Every-
Thursdays.
Every Thursday, or you said
Some Thursdays, I could get the schedule. But I think we run into the same issue with our finance director.
Yeah, she said.
With the family obligation.
Thursdays are out.
Well, that's how we ended up with Wednesday.
may I, with all due respect, Jamie, say that you are not one of the members of the committee.
I agree, that's why I'm.
And so I'm not trying to exclude you, but I have to
Right?
I'd have to turn the switch off and say, the committee is these 9 people. And we have to not bend to everybody else, even if it's you or the mayor or Mr. Swanson. The committee is.
If we want
We have
answers to our
started.
questions, we've got to have some of them.
And
here.
we have a liaison sitting right there. That
Can
is
you-
supposed to
we can
transmit
answer
those questions.
I won't be able to fill in for
Right.
Jamie, no.
Bill, can you?
You can transmit questions.
Transmit questions.
That's you are a liaison. Right? So if we have
Now,
questions,
my vote is I don't agree with this, but that's just my personal vote, so.
okay, it would be very helpful, Jamie, if you could be there.
She can.
No, it's almost mandatory. She's got the answers. To all, the majority of our questions, am I wrong?
I agree with you.
I just, she's the finance director. We're overlooking and asking questions and making recommendation on the city's finances. I don't see how she's not integral in all of it.
Maybe we're ready for a vote,
So what are our options?
Monday or Wednesday.
Leave it as it is or move it to a Wednesday.
Well, today is Wednesday, so I'll move it to Monday.
Monday, you may. Yeah.
Would be the.
You meant to say Monday.
Yeah, what I meant, not what I said.
Got it. I heard you, Phil. No problem.
I'm sorry, can you name days were up for you?
Unless we do it at 1 o'clock on Monday.
Well, and then we have 2 people out.
I think we know this, the ramifications here now in this. That's why I say it's ready for a vote, but. We're gonna miss somebody on Wednesday and we're gonna miss somebody on Monday.
It sounds like no matter what day we meet on, somebody's gonna be missed. And, you know, that being the case, we couldn't find a day that where everybody could be here. And so we're talking about moving so that we don't miss one person, so that we can miss other people. And
Which is why we chose Wednesday in the first place.
well, we chose Wednesday so that we can have our finance.
Motion to keep it Wednesday at 3 o'clock.
I second.
Second. Well, all in,
Discussion.
Is there anybody? All in favor, say aye.
I,
Any opposed, say nay.
You-
Motion passes.
I mean, the problem is,
So be it.
yeah, is that you signed up for doing something and if you can't come, then you can't come. But there's plenty of time to
You don't
research and
like-
look at stuff. and Most of the stuff is done out of me, I would say. If you're not researching and doing stuff offline, then okay.
Thank you for taking a few minutes to consider that. I felt obligated to at least try. Okay, let's move on. The action items from last meeting, there were some assignments made. I wrote down as assigned last week. I don't know who. We got some assignments. Randy, you had an assignment to.
Check the
Emails.
website, yeah.
Did you do that? And what?
I tried to do that, but I've got to work with Susan. Number one, it wasn't set up so that I could use it. And number two, then when I tried to use it, I think it's just me who doesn't know how to do it, but
The website or the email?
the
Email.
email, yeah, she gave me, it wasn't set up probably before, so that got done. But then I went out of town and so I've got to get together with her and see if I can get into it. I was able to.
John, do you have
I'll
access?
keep
to
working
it?
on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
So it's a password, it's set up, it's just, we need to get Randy's computer talking to our system so that he can access it. But as far as we know, there's no emails that have come in,
Okay,
anything like that at this
Okay.
point.
thanks.
Okay. And I might be wrong. But and John, I'm not gonna nail you on the spot here, but I did listen to the recording and watched it more than once. And I tried to put into these minutes, or excuse me, this agenda, what we talked about doing. And so if I missed, forgive me, but my understanding was we were gonna have some department heads here presenting something today.
We have some
Which we
here.
talked about.
Yeah,
We do have some here.
yeah. Right behind us.
David's here.
All right.
David's here.
And so Dave and you folks, your time will come shortly.
Dave, were you
It's-
aware that you were presenting? any-
I was just here listening.
Okay.
So the hard thing about this is the yellow sheets haven't been given out yet because they're not. Jamie hasn't finished getting them tweaked, meaning they're not ready for the budget. So, and this is a good conversation to have is, what's the expectation of the group? Because right now, the enterprise funds are gonna be discussed on April 11th. And it's hard for us to do something 30 days ahead of time before that meeting because of the way the budget season works. But I think we can do 2 weeks so that in theory, we could get this group, the yellow sheets, a week before the next meeting, and then after that meeting, the group would have 2 weeks. So that you could participate in the budget meeting at the council level. But is that timeline work, or would you rather have 2 weeks with the sheets before a meeting here and then only a week before the council? I guess, I don't know. We're not far off on the sheets, it's just they're not ready.
The sheets that you gave us were not ready then. Huh?
Well, the ones that you got are the final sheets. It's just not the first thing the council's gonna be talking about.
I see.
So they were
And you
the-
only gave us a portion of the yellow sheets, right? Not
Yeah.
all-
They're not all ready.
Right, and that's because I think I mentioned my email, motor pool is hard. And that affects police and all the enterprise funds and parks and rec, and so it's just hard, and I can't expect Jamie to get it all done. Cause I actually make her do other stuff too. As I go in her office, I say, hey, emergency, do this for me. But so, I don't know, Doug, maybe that's a good line of questioning is how can we be responsive?
Yeah. As I see it, the yellow sheets that you sent us, and across the bottom, there were 11 tabs. And I printed them out, and I think other people did as well. Those show us the general structure. Am I correct?
Those are the final sheets,
Those are
but
the
they show
categories,
that.
if I can call them the tabs on the Excel spreadsheet. Pardon?
They will be the line items.
Okay, so we can understand the kind of thing we're looking at, even though it's not complete. But there are some things in there that are worth thinking about, correct?
Mhm.
No,
As long-
these are the yellow lines for
These are
this,
the yellow
for
sheets,
this
but they're
coming
just not
budget.
complete. They're just
It's
not
not
complete.
it's not all the departments' yellow lines.
So the yellow
What
sheets.
there
that we
is
got
accurate.
Oh, so are you saying, Sandy and
What,
John,
John?
that there will be more tabs?
Yeah.
They're not final.
They're not
Okay,
finalized.
they could change.
They're finalized when the budget's time.
And of course, we would like to have a little input before they're finalized anyway, wouldn't we, Doug?
Totally, that's why we're here.
Yeah, right.
Well, and that's why
Kind
John
of
is
chicken
saying
egg.
we'll get them and that department head will be here 2 weeks before it goes to the council. Am I correct?
Well, that's,
That's what your intent was. That's what you thought would work best for us, correct?
Yeah, because the first meeting on March 28th, which is 2 weeks from next week, the council's gonna be talking about revenues, priorities, salaries and benefits. And so that's why the agenda was focused on those items, was to stay 2 weeks ahead of the council. But
And so
For
we got
today?
those yellow sheets a week before this meeting. So then we have those to discuss this meeting, and then in 2 weeks, the council will talk about those things.
the yellow sheets that are here, this is the sheet you got.
Right.
Don't relate to all of those items.
Okay.
These are kind of the high level, council gives us a direction. And then after that meeting, Jamie starts working to get ready for the next meeting, because the council might say, you know what, this is our priority this year.
Can I make a suggestion that John knows how this is working better than any of us? He knows when each department is gonna have their budget stuff ready. He knows what Jamie's issues are, and can we
Trust him to feed us what we need. in time to-
I didn't set the agenda.
Well,
yeah.
that's basic, I mean, not saying put all of our trust in John, but recognize that he knows better than anyone what order would work best for this committee to review all the departments' budgets.
Makes
That's what
sense.
I would suggest.
That makes sense.
And one thing we have as an added bonus right now is between now and April 1st, which is the first night with the council. We've got the ability to put 2 of these meetings in. And so we might end up being 3 weeks ahead of the council, which might help with the whole process. Because we might find that we need an extra meeting, because when you look at when the departments are presenting, it's a lot of information to try and tackle in 2 or 3 meetings with this group. And so I think we're gonna have 3 to maybe 4, which would be really nice for you to digest everything. We just want to do it, to Doug's point, want to make sure we're doing it before the council's getting the presentation, so that you don't feel like you're behind.
Well, maybe you can work with Doug and Sandy and the 3 of you set the agenda to when to bring all these people in, them based on kind of what Sandy was just saying.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And at a time when we don't have 10 people sitting here,
Right.
Well,
taking your time and too many cooks spoil the broth.
and
That sounds good to me.
And so all the folks in the chairs work with the city. And they're here partly because they know they're gonna be at the next meeting presenting, and so they want to make sure they know how they can best get information to you. So they're the extra credit earners, is that the right?
So you folks are kind of getting a vision of what you're going to be expected to do, if I'm hearing right.
Yeah,
Not that you're gonna do it tonight. Okay. Okay, so Sandy, I like your suggestion. Yeah, let's meet with a time, take half an hour and just say, this is the path that we're gonna take and how we're gonna do it. Deal. Okay. Mr. Chair. I'll just
When you recognize me, so
I recognize you with the look. Since it's not an official meeting, I'll have to say, I'm not sure. Go ahead, please.
I think one of the things that these yellow sheets gives this committee an opportunity to do right now is to start looking through them and preparing questions that you have for those individual department heads. Like I just pulled up the one on council. And if you're of the nature to simply go to the bottom line, you'll look at it and you'll say, well, last year, council budget was $35,649. This year's potential budget is $67,820. So there's some natural questions that would come from that. Is that a pay raise for council members and mayor? What is that? Well, if you go back up and you look, you'll see that we have elections this next year. And there's a $40,000 line item for, that's our cost to perform our duties, our state mandated duties to hold the election. And so that answers that question, but those are the kinds of questions I would encourage you to go through and look at those yellow sheets and ask those questions where you see an increase or a decrease. You can prepare a question for that department Why is subscriptions and fees going up? What are those subscriptions and fees? And then we can drill down further and ask, are they necessary? Some of those subscriptions might be certifications and such that our water department, our sewer individuals, that they have to have in order to perform their functions. There's CEUs and training that they have to go to that we pay for in order for them to maintain their certifications. And that will help you gain some understanding of, as we go through these things, as we go through all of our different departments, what it is, why there's an increase or why there's a decrease. Does that make sense?
Completely. I mean,
You're the chair, you can do whatever you want.
within reason. We're all in the same boat together. Please clarify for me. By the way, yes, I have looked through every single one of the tabs on that, printed out every sheet. I do have questions, but I'm not going to ask them tonight. And but the overall question I have is about what it is we have that I think you've tried to say, John, but maybe I haven't got it yet. And that is, these are what we received last week. When we get more, are there going to be more tabs on the bottom?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. Each tab, then, will it have more detail within each tab? Or is the detail within,
Okay,
is each tab as it stands now as done as it's gonna get?
so I just want to put this a little more in context. So, let's start with Fund 41, which I think you have, which is council, right?
That was, yeah, the first on the, yeah.
If you look at your yellow sheets, I don't know if you have them. Over on the side where it says, GL account number. Doesn't say it, on some of them it says.
And 41.
This is the GL account number. This is the amount that you'll see in the budget, so this one should align with fiscal year 23.
Yes,
And so this one's fiscal year 24, so these are the numbers that actually go into the budget document.
No.
Moved it, so this one is 1041-210. Let's go back to the budget document. 1041-210, you'll see there's 1239. 12349, but obviously we don't have 24 yet. So this is available on the website to give you some context of what you're looking at for fiscal year 23. I haven't made the one for fiscal year 24 because we're still sorting through these particular line items. So all these line items are going to equal into this.
right, I get that.
So
But will
these
they
are the line
change?
items that we're talking about.
Right, but will they change potentially between
Yeah.
now and next week?
They very well could.
Okay,
And some departments, maybe all departments, I don't know.
so the
And that's
line
what
item,
we have to sort through, that's what we work through. All the department has worked with their liaisons and they do exactly what you guys are doing.
so the line items that appear here. There may be more line items that get added,
There could be,
maybe, okay.
as
the
far
amount-
as GL accounts, that could change as well.
And the amount that's associated with each line item could
Could
change.
change
Thank you. That's,
based on different needs that change, based on council decisions.
Okay.
We
But
have
this
a
is the
lot of
general
that between now.
this is the general structure that we're gonna be facing.
Yeah, so this is everything that's been done, all the departments that you guys have received. Everybody, or all the departments that you received are pretty much. They've like gone through their budgets. It doesn't mean it's not gonna change, but they've gone through their budgets and they said, this is what. These are the wants and needs lists.
Close to being final. But not
I'm
guaranteed,
never gonna say it's final.
But not-
until I have the final list.
but not guaranteed to be final.
and
Until the council has a vote that says it's fine, then it's not.
Okay,
a good example is elections. We just got our number back from the county and it's going up by about 15 grand this year. So we put in 40, it's gonna be closer to 55.
Yeah, there's probably another.
And that's not negotiable.
Like there's.
Right, and so we're.
They just send you the bill for that.
This is what it's gonna cost, and that's what we have to pay.
understood. So those 11 tabs, along the bottom. Next week, there could be more tabs.
So if the group would like, we could send the tabs that are just related to the next discussion.
I think that's.
Yeah, please.
But we also could, we could even send both, say, hey, here's the whole list and here's the one for next discussion. Like, I think we can do that to make everyone's life easier.
That wouldn't be boring, thank you.
I'll do it.
Okay, and you and I and here are gonna get together later to figure that out.
So which ones are for the next meeting?
Yeah,
So we concentrate on.
Yeah, I'll do it in two separate, well, I guess I'll send it to Randy and I'll put like yellow sheets for meeting, blah, and the other one will say all yellow sheets, or we'll title it like that so that it's clear at the top which one is which.
so we know the overall journey plus our next step.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one more comment to make. Scrub a little bit, scrub a little bit. So this one that says fiscal year 23. If you find that it's different, it's because we've amended the budget and the sheet wasn't updated. Just so you know, the sheet that you received wasn't updated. I just want to make sure that I make that clarification if you go back.
During the fiscal year, the
Right.
council changed it, yeah.
But the yellow sheets don't go through wages or benefits,
They
right?
do not. No, that's a different sheet.
So, John, the ones that you keep going back and forth, that's the yellow sheets, and then that's the line by line
Right.
budget on, okay.
Yeah, so on the finance page of the website, it's this top budget amendments.
Yes.
And like what Jamie was just saying is, if they don't match, I'm gonna zoom in, well, I don't know if I can. No, this website, but you'll start seeing the changes, what shows up here, and that's the amendment that was made.
Complain about the city website.
No.
I did.
I did.
The way you zoom in that. Yeah, that's wrong.
Sorry, don't.
Where, yeah,
Okay,
so that's what Jamie just said, it shows up on the amended budget. And that's why there might be a slight difference, but it's relating to what's happening this year, not necessarily next year, so.
Okay, thank you.
all right, I have, I'm gonna seek some guidance here on the next item. This one about finalizing the areas of focus. I believe we have just discussed and decided that that's going to happen a little bit later with Sandy, me and John, and we will figure out where we're gonna go. Okay.
So is there still a consensus that individuals will focus on certain departments? Or is the committee as a whole going to focus on one department at a time?
That's what we discussed last time and came to a vote, I believe, on we're all going to be sharing the load, not individuals, just because we're so unfamiliar with this whole process. It would be best if we all learned it together.
That's what I read.
And we didn't
what I
wanna-
thought I took.
We didn't want to overwork the department heads by taking their time individually, yeah.
So is this agenda item then moved?
I don't know.
I think so for
Well,
what we
it-
decided last.
I
If
think-
there was a decision last week that the group as a whole was going to take a department at a time. And individuals are not going to take a focus on individual departments, then this agenda item would be moved, right? Because there are no individual areas of focus.
Yeah, I think what Doug was just referring to is them making the agenda together, though, is that?
But I think this
Uh,
item is something different, though.
Yeah,
This was
it is.
what Doug has talked about in the past, about someone picking an area and doing
Yeah.
like a deep dive on
I
that.
think
And-
that's correct on that.
Yeah,
We voted on it.
Okay, so am I hearing two things?
I think you're
One,
doing
that one is that we as a group, or even as individuals, are not going to approach each department head and say, would you take an hour and sit down
We-
and explain your,
we definitely.
we're not gonna do that.
Right.
Okay, that's one thing I'm hearing. And the department heads, people like you folks there, are going to come and tell us all about your budget, and we will all listen together.
Yes. I think it's been made very clear from John and myself, Doug, that individuals from this committee will not be sitting down with department heads individually. I don't know how to make that more clear, that will not be happening. The individual departments and department heads are not available for individual meetings with members of this committee outside of this committee meeting. this committee meeting will be approaching individual departments in certain meetings we'll have finance and another meeting will have public.
They will come to us
They're coming to this
rather
meeting
than person.
and you all will have your yellow sheets for that, you'll have Public Works. And the maintenance folks, you'll have those yellow sheets and you'll get it from John. It'll be for a meeting on this date. And you'll come with your questions. The department head will be here, Jamie will be here, John will be here, I will be here, Mayor will be here. And we can help answer any financial questions, but as far as that question needs to just simply go away and die. Because it isn't going to happen and it keeps being brought up over and over and over again. And it needs to be very clear. No member of this committee is meeting individually with the department head, period. Outside of meeting as a group with this meeting. And that's the decision that council and mayor have made. It's just not happening.
It's also the decision this committee made.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Now. Forgive me, bear with me, however I have to couch it, but is then, with all of that in mind, having understood, heard, and agreed, is every single person, all 9 of us, going to deep dive into every single one of these areas? That doesn't seem reasonable.
No, I think what you're missing, Doug, is that no individual is doing that on any department. The committee as a whole is doing that as a committee. So that when it's Public Works Week, the committee as a whole, every individual member on this committee will do a dive into that department as each individual sees fit. Chris may dive a little deeper than Sandy does or vice versa or whatever.
Yeah.
But you'll come to this committee with the questions that your individual research has done on that department. And then as a committee, we'll approach the department head and ask those questions and try to get those answers while they're here at this meeting.
And I think the subject of deep dives was discussed and brought up prior to us ever knowing that all the department heads would be coming here and making a presentation to us. So I don't see the reason for a deep dive because they're going to lay their whole budget out here and say it's this, this, and this. So
we will all deep dive together.
well, it doesn't need to be a deep dive because they're giving it all to us. There's nothing to go hunt for. It's all being shown
It
right
does
to us.
the committee from assigning individuals to say, I want you to focus more on this and do more research. I mean, we can all listen, right? But you might want to pick 1 or 2 who say you focus on this and you go do your own research and dig into it deeper. But it doesn't include going and bothering the department.
I was going back on some of these things. The problem is that there's not too much,
There's not a lot of detail.
there's not a whole bunch of stuff in here that you can. I think we decided early on too, is that if we start nitpicking at, nickels and dimes, it's not making any sense. It's looking at the big stuff. And I think what somebody said is that we're looking at stuff that, hey, it's the 5-10 years. It's the stuff that we're trying to figure out what can really matter to the city the most, because right now, if you start saying that you're going to use 1-ply toilet paper instead of 2, that'll save you $300 a month. I mean, that's not the purpose of this, to me.
It's been proven that you double and triple 1-ply. So you don't save
You
it.
actually spend more.
But when you say deep dive, I think everybody in this group has their own individual thoughts, and they're going to deep dive on stuff that makes sense to them, or they have experience in it. And so that's, to me, there's a lot of little things in here that I've already written down that, those are some of the big things that we can hit. I mean, just the problem with benefits and some of these things are straight across. There's nothing you can do about it. There is some thoughts on how to retain, we were talking about this last time, employee retention, all these other things where you could cut benefits in half and you lose all of your people, and who you're going to hire. You're going to hire, Joe Schmo off the street that has 0 experience, and he's going to take Jamie's job.
And Chris, to your point, you mentioned a moment ago that on the yellow sheets, there are no salaries and benefits listed.
Right.
Part of that is because there's a general policy with, that we are in an attract and retain employment policy right now, which means it's highly unlikely that council would consider reducing salaries and benefits for the exact reasons that you just mentioned. We'd lose our staff. And that's why we're not focusing on that as a committee, because it's really kind of off the table. Does that make sense?
Even though it's a big hitter, it's not one that we need to hit.
It's something that is inclusive to the retention policy and or how you make sure that you have the people that you need to do on a day-to-day basis to run a good city. You know, I mean, you could cut it in half. I think they were talking about the percentile of where you're putting your salaries. And if you put them at the basement, you're not gonna have a police department anymore. You know, so I think that's the main focus should be kind of swayed towards long range versus.
These yellow sheets are a great place to start
Yeah.
to focus. So that's where
Combinations.
there's more, I don't want to say discretion, but it's not as, I don't know, what's the word? You know, like, I'm just going to speak from a council perspective. It's not as hard and fast, and it's not as concrete. Our salaries and benefits are pretty dadgum concrete reinforced. Because we can't afford to lose. We've been the training ground. We spent too many years as the training ground for smaller and medium-sized cities, and we're not there anymore. And we have great people that we want to hang on to.
Can we go back to the original question, please? It was, if we're going to divide up and each of us take a different department. We had decided we weren't going to do that. My suggestion is, if you have a special interest in a certain department, then by all means, dig as deep as you can.
Yeah.
If I don't care about Parks and Rec, I'll read the yellow sheets. If I have a question, I'll ask it. If not, I will let it go. But if Sandy is all upset about Parks and Recs, then she can dive as deep as she wants to. But I don't think that needs to be assigned, and that's what we decided last week. And so this is my problem with our meeting last week. We spent an hour discussing this and didn't make decisions. And in the end, did, and we're still discussing the same things again today.
I have one more comment on what was just said. I also want you to keep in mind that as department heads, this is our discretionary budget. It's not, we don't have discretion over salary and benefits. So that's like Phil said, that council policy.
So when we meet with
So when you meet with
departments,
department heads, we are talking about exactly what you're saying on the yellow sheet.
Not asking them how much they make or.
So can we be done with this and move on? Every meeting, there's a big discussion about time limits and so let's not discuss the same thing 3 meetings in a row and spend this much time on it. I want to get to
What John's gonna teach us.
yeah,
today.
what we're here to learn. There's just a lot of time being wasted. We talked about this a lot last week. Can we agree we're done with it?
A second.
Before the chairman calls on a vote, I'd like to ask Dave, since this is not an official meeting, I can go outside of this. Dave, when you do present your stuff, would you present the detail that's hiding inside of things like services not classified? What are we spending $5,000 on? Et cetera, or 30,000?
That's the question you ask when he does his.
Yeah,
I'm saying, please be prepared to provide the detail behind these categories that seem sort of nebulous that I don't understand.
And that's why it's important to have Jamie here, because Jamie can generally answer those right off the top of her head.
Okay.
Put her on the spot.
It's every possible thing that we do during the year, and services not classified is another fancy word for miscellaneous. And it's different for every department. And I'm sure that I could probably go down.
We can give you a decent answer for
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank
So
you.
a good example is the mayor is gonna be presenting to 3 third graders, not 3 third graders, 50 third graders in next week or so. And he's gonna buy some treats, and that might come out of that category under the council for services not classified.
We might have to hire somebody new, and all of those hiring costs might go to that line item. or they do go to that line item. I mean, there's, like I said, I
Unknown.
wish, yeah, I wish we knew everything.
A little bit of squish room.
Okay,
So I haven't
Looks like-
studied the yellow sheets, but are there other details like the basis of estimate for the numbers that are behind that? I mean,
sort of.
is that expected to be in the presentation from the, in other words, this is what we spent last year, it's based on actuals. This is what we're projecting for this year due to inflation, blah, 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 or, here's what we spent, and I'm just looking for some more detail behind the actual number, is what I'm thinking.
But sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes it's in this column. And sometimes there's additional details over here. But that is something that we have been even getting better at, because even if Dave knows what it says and Jamie knows what it says. We want people in 5 years to know what it says, so we make sure that we're aligning expenses the same way, so we don't get everything all skewed.
And you'll see if you ever watch any of the city council meetings where we're heavily discussing the budget, council asks a lot of these same questions. Or we'll look at something like the, services not otherwise classified and things like that. And we're asking those, can you tell us what the detail is? Or, phones went from $2,100 to $30,000. Why did that happen? We ask those kinds of questions, and those would be good questions for you to ask here.
Yeah, and as much of that can be written and studied ahead of time, saves a lot of that, all those questions. Yeah.
But it's not gonna tell you how many reams of paper that they're gonna buy. It just has,
So I also want you to understand, I know that it looks like it's fluff. But I want you to understand that. All the department heads are really good at making sure that if they need something, is it within their budget, and also anticipating. Gosh, it's August and my budget ends next June. How bad do we need this? Everybody's really good at that. We don't know how many public notices, like we had I don't know, where you were on council, sorry. You were on council. We don't know how many public notices we're gonna need. But if I only budget $1,000 and we have a whole bunch more that we're advertising for, I don't wanna have to go back to council and say, for this one line item, I gotta do a budget amendment. So that's why there feels like there's fluff, and it's because of all those unknowns. So please keep that in mind. You don't
At the
know.
end of the budget, if there's anything left over, does it stay in that budget or does it go to the general fund?
If it's in general fund, then yes, it goes back
And
to the.
the
fund
departments
balance.
aren't just trying to make sure they spend every penny so that they make sure they
It's like
get,
the federal.
If you
but it
look
goes into.
We
the
lose it
general
next year.
fund For the next year.
last year-
Use it or lose policy.
Okay.
We don't budget that way.
So last year, most of the budgets were around 90%. They spent 90% of their budget. Some of them did spend 100%, but it's like right on. Most of them were anywhere between 85 to 90%, maybe a little bit more.
That
So
speaks-
everybody spent
Speaks well of them, doesn't
less.
it?
We were able to transfer, well, we were able to not transfer, but we were able to increase the fund balance by about $400,000.
Thank you.
So
Meaning carryover money.
Yes.
Good. Hey, John, I think you're next on the agenda. Discussion of salary study procedure.
Okay, and so to the purpose of this discussion is so the group understands how we do it and why we do it. Because it is this 300-foot, 300-pound gorilla. Is that the right term? Anyway, I get my
I think he weighs more.
I get those things. 300 pound, 300, but so it's to help you understand the process we go through. Because not everyone understands how it works. In fact, most people don't understand how it works. So that the committee can then have some confidence in the process. Knowing that it's a huge part of the general fund, it's a huge part of the enterprise expense. And so I just wanted to walk through and show you the system we use. Let's see, I have to pull up my notes so that I make sure that we're doing this right. Let's see. Okay, we use this system called the compensation survey system that Technology Net is the one who does the system. But it's actually put on, you can't see it over here, but it's the local government salary corporate or consolidation, yeah.
Is this showing on Zoom?
No, I didn't share that one, so I will.
Okay, thanks.
So, and in this system, and it's a subscription service that we pay to jump onto. But it includes cities across the state, counties across the state. When we use it, we come into the report section, and I'm gonna jump real quick. And I'm sorry you can't see it. It's not our website. Oh, there we go. That helps. But we have different reports we can pull based on the information we're after. It always is looking at comparing us to cities that we pick out of this category. We typically look at cities with our same population of residents. The idea being that we're trying to group ourselves with cities of the same size. And so we would pick this, we pick a department that we're looking at. And we tell it to give us information. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can understand it a little better. We can zoom in. But then what it does is it says, and this is not a position we currently have at the city, but the events coordinator. It's just, so they're all categories by job numbers, which is this right here, and they just go in numerical order. But this position, when we did have this position, we would look at all of these cities and say, how are we stacking up against those cities? And then every city goes in and enters their own information. And then we compare our ranges, the mid and the max range, and then the actual pay low to high. Our city specifically focuses more on the actual pay. Because in our opinion, or in my opinion, what you typically see is the ranges are typically either the ranges have been ignored for years, or there'll be lots of situations where the average pay and even the high pay exceed the max range that city has set up. So we a lot of times ignore that and focus on what are people actually making.
So question,
Yeah,
so
of
you
course.
said the cities have to actually put the data in here?
Yeah,
So it isn't, I guess, published to the state. I would think that maybe they would have,
there's a different database where the state has it. It's not as user friendly.
okay,
And so we do look at that one too. But towards the end of the
yeah,
process.
so I guess. What's the tolerance for error? I mean, if they're not keeping up with it, you know, if you gotta have someone from the city putting this data in. Maybe that's our finance director,
Human resource does it twice a
Okay.
year for us.
and they're not fudging any numbers, they're not rounding or anything like that, they're putting the actual numbers in there, just not people associated with it.
Right. And if there's one person with that job, it's easier than if there's 8 people.
Okay.
But the nice thing is that this information, it gives us when it was last updated by the city. Because sometimes there'll be these anomalies,
Oh, as of there.
and we would look and say, okay, this one right here was last updated in 2020. So this number of 35,000 for their average pay is not gonna weigh as heavily on the decision. But it's still included in the discussion.
So this is, John, this is
Yeah.
strictly salaries. It has nothing to do with benefits, right?
There is a benefit number that comes in here. That we can use to help gauge against other communities for the cost for the position benefits.
Got it.
The hard thing about that is. Benefits are swung way further by the individual's needs, meaning, you know, are they a single person? Do they have a family? Do they have someone in their family who is getting insurance somewhere else? And so we typically just say about 30% of the salary and benefit cost is benefits. Or I guess 30% of the salary cost goes to benefits. In some employees, it's 10%. Well, it's always at least 10% because of the URS, but on some employees, it's 45%. Because if someone is a full-time lawnmower at the low end of the scale, the benefits cost the same as if it's a city manager. The benefit people don't care. On most stuff like healthcare, it doesn't matter. It's just, do you have a family that's on the health system or not? And then the same way the employees pay the same regardless of how much they make. So it's the percentage they pay is the same.
The higher the salary, the lower the percentage, and the lower the salary, the higher the percentage of that.
Yeah. And so there's a big database. And the two general things that myself and Katie work on is cities of our size, and we also look at 75 miles and we track that information every 6 months. So we can see spikes and see where things are moving to help us budget. So our goal is to eventually we get down to this average number, this one in bold here. And we say, our goal is to have employees within. Our goal is to have them at 100% of that number, but nobody's lower than 90 and nobody's higher than 110. And the reason we kind of picked that range is we feel like that's a very, we're able to look the employees in the eye and say, we are treating you as fairly as we can. And the reason we don't go higher than 110 in most situations, in fact, any that I can think of is, you'll see here, if you take this 47,000 and you times that by 10%, you're at $52,000. But here's a city that pays more than that. And so by doing that, in some ways, we eliminate those outliers. And in the same respect, here's a city that's paying under the 90%. And so we kind of use this information to give us a good range. And then every 6 months we evaluate it. If we're way off, this last January, there was a discussion about the mid-year adjustment. In some positions, because of how fast they're moving, we started getting way off. And so we try and catch them up at the 6 month mark so that we don't have to catch them up at huge jumps in July. Because the other component that's part of our salary discussion is we typically put a maximum increase on positions, saying, hey, we will not increase a salary more than 5 or 10% or whatever the number is, so that we don't get out of whack. But we also at the same time have found that positions that are way far behind, we're able by looking at it twice a year to catch them up fairly quickly so that they're not as far behind. It's just not a 20% increase one time. We did have a situation recently where one of our positions, it jumped 26%. And we just said, okay, we're pausing, we're going to think about it, we're going to evaluate it. And we did give them a bump. But then when the results came in 6 months later, it came back down. So it's either someone did a typo or something, but that's why we're tracking it that way on every 6 months, so we can look for those anomalies and capture
So
it.
did you take that person's raise away?
No, they still were entitled to it. So they still fit in that category, but it wasn't 26%.
26%, we bought them much less than that. And then as that average came down, then it was close.
Yeah, and typically the council's policy has been 10% max. There's a few times it's been out of that when people have got a new position and that position is increased, meaning like they went from a master officer to a sergeant. It ends up being more than a 10%, but it's in theory, the position, that sergeant position, moved less than the 10%.
So you want to keep salaries competitive, but you don't want to be the cause of the salary whole thing driving
Yeah.
sky high.
So,
Yeah.
so is there, do you guys generate a formal performance appraisal thing, or is that?
That was-
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
Did you see that?
Gold star for leading us to the next session.
How do you look? Sorry.
No, it's funny because it seems like every time we do this, the group asks the questions that leads us to the direction we're heading.
All right.
So here's the most recent job posting we did for our parks maintenance workers, for example. And this is the range that we put for the parks worker positions based on that 90 to 110%. This one is a little unique because it's a park worker 1, 2, 3, which means the range is much wider because we're looking at the 90% of the park worker 1 and the 110 of the park worker 3. But in this, when we do this, it allows us to bring what the police call a lateral, meaning someone who knows it, they're trained, they might come with a pesticide certification or stuff that we don't have to pay for them to get. And so they're more valuable to us.
Bring them in at a 2 or 3 instead of a 1.
Yeah. And then annually, we haven't done it this formally until this year. But annually, we're going to sit down. Oh, sorry. And so then there's a grid that says, hey, if you're a parks worker one, this is the minimum expectation that we expect for this position. There's not a required years of service, there's not a required, there is a required CDL. And so there's these kind of steps they have to hit, as well as some incentive-based programs that, hey, if you get your pesticide certificate and you're a parks worker one, then you get a little wage increase because there's some value to the city. But when you become a parks worker two, that's actually a required one. And so it's actually, in a way, it's built into the salary, so we don't get these huge jumps, but we get a smooth transition as people get more experience. And then we go through this, and the reason there's jobs on here that aren't tied to the jobs that we advertise for is that this is an internal city sheet, so that we can sit down with the parks workers ones, twos, and threes and say, this is how you grow. And if you get your playground inspector certificate, you're gonna get 2% while you're a parks worker one and a two, and it helps you get that job as a three, because now you've got the requirements to be a three.
Cool.
And all we need you to have is the years of service or something. There are some positions, like with associates and bachelor's degrees, that we feel an incentive to not reward, but pay people who have those if their job doesn't require it. Because there's a benefit to the city for folks who have a broader depth of knowledge. But you can see eventually, like, the associate's degree phases out when you become a park supervisor, because that's an expectation. And then it phases out when you become the superintendent for a bachelor's degree, because that's the minimum hurdle to get the job. The flip side to that is that if someone gets that job and doesn't have that degree, and it's required, because that happens, we've all seen that happen before because of skill set. We actually do the reverse, and it becomes a negative. Meaning they wouldn't go below 95%, but for a bachelor's degree, they might get a 5% ding on the salary for not having that required thing. And it might eventually phase out over time, but that's kind of the way we built it.
So are these degrees, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, are these related to the job, or is it, I have a bachelor's degree in basket weaving?
Take 10%.
Yeah. So it depends. It depends on the job description. And I'm gonna pick on a finance director. A finance director with an accounting bachelor's degree is the minimum required. Like that's shown on the job description as a required. But if they have an underwater basket weaving degree,
Right.
they might still get some of the points for having a bachelor's degree if they have the skill set. But it ends up being an art.
But if you have three candidates, the one with the basket weaving might get pushed over here while you look at the other two. Yeah.
And it ends up, and the salary sheet in general becomes an art. It's not a science. We make it as scientific as we can. But then we have these judgment calls that have to be made. And a good example of a judgment call is, we might have folks that just do everything and they just get all the certifications and do everything, but we still have a max. That 110 is still the max. So it's kind of a, you can make the pizza however you want, but at a certain point, like that's all there's only that many slices available with all the toppings on it, right? So that's kind of that's the way we've approached it. And then I'm just going to show you an example of one of those. So that you can kind of see that process that we went through with an individual. Obviously, I've taken their name off, but this is what the old internal sheet used to look like. But so we show, hey, this is the average, this is the range, so this is how it equates into $1. And then we show the job description. Oh, looks like it froze on me. And then we go down and we go through and say, what do they have? Do they have this? Do they have this? Do they have this? We're moving away from a cent or a dollar amount per thing and towards a percentage. The idea being that a certified pest certificate is not always going to be worth 50 cents, but it might always be worth 2%. Meaning that as the value for the position goes up, it might be 51 cents next week and 52 cents. But we're just finding it's a better way. And so the way the system works is we say, okay, this was the minimum, 1925 was the 90%. They were brought on, and then with the boxes they were able to tick that they had completed, 2 of them are mandatory, so they didn't get any money, any extra money for it. But these other 5 were not mandatory, and so they got an extra $2.25 for that position. And then we can stack them up against anyone else in that position, say, they make 25 cents more than you because they have their associate's degree.
How do you work, you make these judgments based on these click off points, but what if the person isn't very good with people and they cause trouble and, you know, in other words, they got everything they want on paper, but they don't seem to have it working in the system.
So that comes back to this graph, which hasn't been finalized. But the police are a good example where if someone's received an official reprimand, then there's a ding. And it lingers for a while. It might linger for a year or 2, depending on the severity, and it might be a 2% ding. Or we used to just say, well, if you got an official reprimand, you didn't qualify for the pay raise that next year. But what we found is that that didn't always work the way it was supposed to. Because then people wouldn't write reprimands. But in this case, it's a learning opportunity. And with this process where we sit down with them on this sheet and then we say, hey, here's how we ran your calculations, and here's I don't want to call it the penalty, but here's the consequences of the actions. We're able to quantify it in a number and say, you know, here's what happened. Here's when we get over this hurdle, how it'll come back to you as a salary, assuming you keep your nose clean. So it turns into a learning and a growth opportunity as opposed to just a slap on the face, right?
And at some point, a dismissal?
Yeah, and usually the salary, the dismissal happens before the salary discussion, if that makes sense. Like if they're just totally underperforming,
Yeah,
then they can't, or they're not gonna.
that's when the council goes into special session and discusses those things.
Well, only on certain, on just, I mean, everyday line employees, that's not a council decision, that's an administration decision. That's why we have a city manager. That's why we have a mayor who's the CEO of the city. They make those decisions and they're entrusted with that. If it's a department head, you know, something like that, then that's when the council gets involved. But you know, one of the things I've really appreciated about being with North Ogden City for the last 9 years is that we're not a sweatshop. In other words, you're not just here, your value is more than just the labor that you can perform on behalf of the city. We are also invested in you as an individual. And so when there is a ding, like John was saying, we're not just looking at, is there a ding, but we're also looking downstream, and is there an improvement? Is there an attempt to change? Is there honest change? And can we see that change?
Learning.
Sometimes we've had instances where every opportunity to change has been given, every encouragement has been given, and they aren't taken. And then there is a change that's made. But we're as invested in you as an individual as we are in you as a worker bee within the hive. And it makes for a really good hive. It's why we have the good employees that we do.
Not just a commodity.
I think that, yeah, the employees know that they're not just a commodity, even though we're in an at-will state, that they're not just a commodity, that they do have value for us. And that's demonstrated in the policies that we put in place for attracting and retaining employees. And it's also in how management handles individual employees, how HR and city management, how they handle. It sends a pretty strong message, in my opinion.
Another question, when it comes time for reviews, does he review his own department people? Or does that in employment, personnel department?
So we do it at the supervisor level. So Public Works is typically the department head, Dave, and the supervisor, like the water supervisor, that sit down with the 2 folks. And that ends up being a discussion, hopefully 15 to 30 minutes or longer if needed, to help just understand, walk through the growth patterns so that people know what they need to do. Another thing tied to your first question was, That this type of a program that says, hey, here's the requirements. Is not the same as some of those that's just, hey, if you get this many years of service, you bump, you move. This requires some active participation and it rewards those early movers. In a way that it starts to kind of separate the folks who are gonna perform well to those from those who aren't performing well.
So it's not like a step program where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
So you said,
If I can-
was performance 6 months or every year? What did you say?
So performance is every year.
And then there's a mid-year.
The market study is every 6 months.
Okay.
And we look for outliers on that off. It's the January market. That's where we're looking for abnormal outliers. The best example is police has been out of control the last 3 years. And that's where a bunch of the adjustments have happened at the mid-year is just, we are fighting. And we're fighting across the state. Because everyone, I mean, St. George is calling our officers to offer them jobs, like.
UPD is down 100 officers, the state is down 150.
why did you choose 75 miles? I know we're kind of like on the border of less populated cities versus more populated cities, but
So this might make me log in again because it likes to log us out. No, but so we typically focus on the 10 to 25,000.
okay.
We also pull the data on the 75 miles every 6 months, so we're looking for outliers.
Yeah.
But a good example is police. We look at the police officer 1s, 2s, and the master officers, which is typically the patrol group. We look at them for 75 miles, not for small cities.
Okay.
Because
That's what I'm competing against.
Salt Lake is
will
just as
steal.
likely to steal as anybody.
Yeah.
And then there's some other positions where we've talked about what's the right group to compare against. And at some positions it matters a lot, some it doesn't. But a good example is our water system operators. If you can't compare our water system operators to, and no disrespect to Harrisville. But Harrisville doesn't have their own wells and their own treatment facilities, and we do. So there's some tweaks and some things, again, in terms of this artwork. Or art,
Had a question.
yeah,
Well, no, I was just gonna make a comment from what you said. My son worked here as a teenager. And even as a teenager, just mowing lawns and doing the Parks and Rec stuff. He was given lots of opportunities that he wouldn't have, he didn't at other places. So it's not just your department head that you care about, it's the whole
Well,
workers.
Yeah, and another example is hiring James. That was awesome. He's one of the special needs kids that, and yeah, he's awesome.
That's great work.
and he does great work. Like, honestly, I feel like our bathrooms are cleaner than they've been. And it's something that he enjoys doing, and he's a lot of fun to be around, and
That to him, it's probably not a low level job. It's probably, he's,
It's an important
it's
job.
an important assignment. He's got it. Yeah.
It performs a valuable service.
Yeah.
If I
But they
may,
treat,
Yeah.
they treat him well.
just one other thought on the system. Where you have these bumps that come with being actively engaged in obtaining a certificate or whatever. One of the ways that you see kind of, I don't want to say weeds and the tares, but those that really want to advance and those that are happy just where they are. You may end up with a less senior employee that's making more than a more senior employee. Because they got that certificate and that certificate and that certificate, and they get these bumps because of it. And those are the horses you want to run with, right? That you want to encourage, that want to run, and like secretariat, right? Horse that loves to run, you encourage it to run and it'll run like crazy for you. And this system that they have, that John and our HR department and others have put together, really, those that want to run. Those that just are happy and want to work, they do, and they do a great job. But those that really want to run, this really encourages them to do that.
And I like that there's a reason that you can sit down and say, this is why you're not making as much as
Right.
someone else. Not just, well, we don't think you're a good worker, so.
Well, you haven't been here long enough.
Right.
And it also, at the same time, a good example is we had an officer who worked here who had no interest in being a detective or a sergeant or a lieutenant, was very happy doing patrol. And we were able to still reward the loyalty, because this one doesn't, well, it does kind of show it. But there's a years of service. And at a certain point, once they've mastered the position, there'll be a years of service like bonus. Like if you've been in the patrol officer 1 position, and you just haven't wanted to move to the 2, but you've been here for 15 years, we might give you an extra % for each year up to 5%. So that there's an incentive showing, hey, we like you, you're operating
Not
good.
totally stymied.
Yeah, but at a certain point, there is a ceiling.
This,
That,
this is cool too. You can even refer back to this. It's like, okay, well, you gotta document it. This is why we did this. This wasn't playing favorites. It was just.
So- Do you budget for overtime or no?
we do budget for overtime, but it doesn't show up in this
Yeah,
discussion.
right, but I just, you know, as an overall thing, because.
I know in the business world, you find sometimes where you're either pushed to promote or get canned. You know, and I've always thought, you know, there's certain people, they're good people, but they max out at an ability level. But so why get rid of them? Let them do that job. They're doing it well, and you don't have to push them out just because they're not able to get to the next level. It's
Or
like-
don't want to.
Yeah, or don't want to. They're satisfied with it.
There's that example of the office with Michael there, but people that some are promoted to the level of incompetence.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, and I
Well,
was
and-
working at a company where there was a midpoint, and if you went past that, you didn't get a raise.
Mhm.
And I was like, what? So,
Yeah.
yeah, you're talking about incentive, give, you know, raise or don't.
Yeah.
That sounds like you have a pretty good system.
Well,
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not flawless, right? I mean, but we enjoy it with the work that Katie's been helping me do and things. We're dialing it in better. I can tell you when I first started associating with the city as a part-time consultant, that system was broken. The mayor he tried to fix that way back then because he was on the compensation committee and it didn't stick. But anyway, so we got this resource. The hard thing about it is, I mean, our general fund is $4.5 million of benefits and salaries. Almost 50% of our total budget. And so when it moves 3, 4, 5%, it's a big number. And to the Councilman Swanson's point, it's hard to change it. So, or it's hard to say no to that. In fact, I brought up parks as a good example because that we compete with construction industry when we're looking for folks to do parks. And so it's been moving crazy. We're starting to probably see it dip a little, or not dip, but level out. But that's why we're looking at it every 6 months.
But
So,
when you have systems like this, I think it gives a sense of fairness to the employees. To know that it's not just arbitrary, you know, you don't have to suck up to the next, you know, to get a raise kind of thing. There's a system and it's fair and you do your job, yeah.
so that was kind of what I had prepared. Any questions? There is a massive spreadsheet that's a big mess. The mayor calls it my multicolor spreadsheet. Obviously I can't share it here because it's got names and it's got percentages and I don't want to call it a demerit, but official reprimands. So, but a good example back to Councilman Swanson's point is I'm going to knock on every piece of wood we have, but we have not lost an officer in several months, almost a year. And we are not the highest paying city around, but we have not lost an officer because we're in that range close enough that they
We've got a
don't,
good chief and we're building a nice facility. I think all those things count.
it all counts.
We're
Yeah.
a safe community.
And we're a safe
community. Goals.
Yeah.
If I'm close in salary,
It's worth being
and I
here.
get shot at very often.
And how often were you losing them before you start?
2 to 3 a year.
I looked at the roster in the police station, and there were a lot of them that have joined the force 2015, 2016, 2017, 29. I mean, the top are pretty stable, but the ones below that, we just added them all on in the last 6
Yeah.
years.
And this new system has allowed us to get some laterals, meaning they came over with experience. So I don't want to say we've stolen from other agencies, but
You did.
people who've been, yeah. But people have been looking for other opportunities, have found the hurdles to come to us less, and some of them have come for less money than what they were at because of the intangibles. The family time or the environment or the community. It's hard to know how you.
Yeah, so are you able to track that? I mean, if you hire somebody, say, you know, what is it that attracted you to our city, or even the converse, you know, when they're leaving,
Exit.
why did you leave, or what is it, or what could we do to improve that would make you want to stay?
So the salaries, so Katie does exit interviews. And we learned a lot from those exit interviews that just helped kind of trigger this. I think some of the adjustment to the police where we went to the 75 miles instead of the small city.
Yeah.
And that's made a huge difference. Obviously, the building, to Randy's point, made a huge difference because it just shows the investment in the program. But that comes with cost,
Well,
right?
and the attitude of the city council has a great deal to do with
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah. So I think I probably talked longer than I should have on that one, but I just want to make sure that we get, and at future meetings, if you think, hey, there's this question, that's why we keep coming back, is to go through
If I
them.
could add one thing, you know, Phil said we're not gonna reduce salaries. But on the other hand, that is the greatest item. Chris was talking about getting the real meat. Well, that is the biggest budget item. And so there is a discussion to have is how much you raise them, right, Phil?
And we're having that discussion, absolutely.
And there is a discussion like we talked about last time about the big fish, and it's that programs. Are there things that the city shouldn't do anymore? In the same way that are there things the city should do?
Yeah.
And that's a hard discussion, but it's something that, especially if you look at an economic downturns, then
Well-
we have to have that discussion.
Didn't you just say in this? Well, the overall aspect of Barker Park, is it gonna be like that one lady was talking about with, was it Leighton or something, where you want to get an event coordinator, you know, that's what you're talking about, right? Is adding staff to add services. That's the discussion for 10 to 20 years build out, right?
Right.
So that's really kind of a offshoot of that as well, is that, you know, for us, at least what I'm thinking is that what are the things that I would like as a person that lives in North Ogden that you need to plan for now? So, you know,
Well, I was looking at the police budget and
that's a hard one to look at.
it is, and there's another one that's the other half of the city budget. And so I look at it and there are little tiny questions, but then you say, well, we have a policy of having 1 per 1,000. So I said, well, what if we had 1 for 1,100? So that means we need 20 officers instead of 22. And so, and I'm not saying the answer to that question, but I'm just saying, you know, that would, without affecting the quality, that would affect how much we're paying there. And so to me, that's a legitimate question.
It would affect the quality, I think.
Well, that's the question.
Well,
Yeah.
then, in that discussion, as council, you know, from our perspective, we have to look at what's the national average, what's the recommended national average?
I looked at was 2.2
2.1.
is what I saw. Yeah.
2.2 officers per 1,000. So if you look at it
That
from
ain't-
that perspective.
That includes New York City and
Right, but
Los
so
Angeles.
we're- you have to
Yeah.
look at all of those.
Yeah. You do.
And, you know, from a council perspective, and it's where having citizen input, I think, is extra helpful. Is that in that discussion of public safety? Right, it's a big discussion, it'll be a discussion every year. Are you willing for us to toy with your safety in an effort to find that exact line where we're safe and then we're not? If it's your family member that pays the price.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the decision that'll keep me up at night. Is when we're talking about public safety and do we or don't we, whatever the program is for public safety. And I look at it and it's like, okay, are we cutting the line close? And if we did say go to 1,100. And and we end up with 20 officers and we reduce that 20 officers and all of a sudden we start having problems. You know, that's a hard, I'm telling you, that's a really
If it
tough.
comes down to a judgment, there's no exact answer to have, is there? You know?
There is, and you can second guess every decision that we make,
Yeah.
whether we did enough or we didn't do enough. Some people will tell you that we don't have enough officers. Others will tell you that we have too many. And others will tell you that we have just the right amount. And We hear from all three of us.
Do you look at the responses? In other words, how many calls we get in and what the response
We
thing?
do, we look at that, our response time, which is a big factor for me. Our response time is what, John?
2.5 minute average.
2.5 minute average puts us in the top 5% of the state of any agency. You look at UPD and some of the other agencies, they're looking at 6, 7, 8 minute response times. If you got something happen, you want somebody there quickly. And then you also look at, if there are a lot of, in some jurisdictions, if you lock yourself out of your car, you can't call non-emergency dispatch and say, hey, if an officer's available, can they bring their Slim Jim down and get me back into our car here in North Ogden? You can. And I think that's part of the community feel that we have here in North Ogden, is that you will get an officer if they're available and they'll have a higher priority call to be on.
Like they'll call the fire department if your cat's in the tree type of thing.
Yeah, they swing by and say, Randy, this is the third time this week that you've locked yourself out of your car. Have you gone to see your doctor lately? Oh, they wouldn't do that, but they're happy to come and be a part of that. And that community policing makes communities a safer place, and I'm convinced over the last 9 years that's part of the reason North Ogden is so safe and such a wonderful place, is because our officers are more than just writing tickets. And they're more than just, they're pulling DUIs over and things like that. And it makes a huge difference.
I have a feeling that we're pretty rich. I have a feeling we might be able to save there, but I don't criticize you because I know that the council's in the right place mentally, but they're
Hey, John, for benefits, is there a way that, you just said that 30%, is that, but how do you do year to year to see projections of, how do you budget if all of a sudden insurance or something goes crazy?
So Jamie's the master of it.
You do.
I have Chris Paul.
Yours works.
We shine it up every day.
That's a pretty big chunk of it as well, and that's a direct cost, not direct, but a pass through that you do have to pay, right? There's nothing you can do to try to reduce it or have a cool little ladder thing. It's just what you pay, right?
Well, some of it's competition. We have a neighboring community that pays 100%.
Well, no, right. But what I'm saying, yeah. So how do you, is that something that is year to year?
Our consultants that handle that portion with it, and everybody just gives it their best guess. There's not really a formula that I know of that we're using or that Golden West uses, but it's usually just where are we at and what's our modifier, is that the right term?
Yeah.
And to some extent, your gauge, if I can put it that way, that the measuring instrument is what people do after you have made those decisions.
Right.
Lose people, do you retain? That's your kind of your real.
True, but if you keep it same to same.
So unfortunately, we're on a fiscal year, which is July to June, the city, and our benefits are calendar year. And so we have to make a 6-month guess on what it's going to be. So like our benefits changes next January, well, we'll be 6 months into the policy. So from January to June, what would that increase be? And I have no idea standing today. So I have to get with the consultants and figure that out.
Do you guess a little high so that you're kind of covered if it goes high?
Some years, yes, some years, no. I don't want to say it's been a perfect system, but like this next round, we're guessing 6%. That could change between now and June 22nd.
Because inflation keeps going. Okay.
I got just a quick question, go back to the police officer selection, one officer. Are you guys also looking at in the way that the population is changing? For example, a lot of high density housing is coming in here. And as the mayor said previously in one of our meetings, it's like things get more intense when you start cramming people together, so that when you, so again, if we're looking at, in this area, we're looking to have 500 people moving into individual homes versus 2,000 people moving into, the same area and
Condominiums.
yeah, condominiums and stuff like that. Is that a consideration?
Absolutely,
It is.
there's two considerations that we make. One is the general, I don't want to call it a myth, but if you look out there, when you're looking at that data, right? What often happens is we will look at data and say, okay, in this 1,000 square feet, we have this many police calls. We have 10 police calls. And we have 6 people that live in there. So we divide that and we say we have this many calls per person, right?
Yep.
And then we look at another and we have 1,000 square feet and we have 300 people that live there. And we say we have this many police calls. And now we're saying we have this many calls per person, right? The data that really matters is when you take and you say, okay, I'm going to draw a border around 300 people and I'm going to see how many calls I get per 300 people. Okay. And this box is 10 by 10. This box, because it's a more rural community, it might be a mile by a mile, but it's still 300 people. How many calls do I get for those 300 people? And when you start looking at that data, there's very little difference between the numbers. It appears, because we typically say, okay, in this block, we have all these calls going to this block. Well, you've got 17 times the number of people living there.
Right.
Just having those people there with the same number of calls per person per year, you're going to have more in that physical confined area because you have more people there. If you had one family living here in this square mile and you had 5 in this square block, well, how many calls a year are you going to get in this square mile? You may have a year where you have 0. Well, here where you have 5 people in this square block, well, maybe you get 2 of those families and you go, well, I have 2 calls when I have 5 people living in a square block. I have 2 calls a year. And when I have 1 person per square mile, I have none. And then there's these false extrapolations that go on and say, well, if I take this density per square block and then extrapolate that out into a square mile, that means I'm going to have 35 calls a year. Well, that's not really the picture. That's not what really is happening statistically. And so you have to, and there aren't many of them out there because this from a political perspective, and I'm talking large cities and things like this, this comparison doesn't draw donors to my campaign. Right? It doesn't turn the populace to me to make you safe and give me political power. Right? This is a message I can sell.
Okay.
That makes sense? Totally. Giving away some of those political secrets. So you really have to look at it and say, so here in North Ogden, down at Village of Prominence Point, if we take the number of people when it's all built and we say, okay, how many calls are happening? In that, we take how many people are there, and then we take all the little postal zones that we have, the little extra 4 digits on your, that are little census data, little blobs, kind of like they do when they're redistricting. Okay. We draw this map and say, okay, well, here's 5,000 people and here's 5, not that there's going to be 5,000 people at Village of Prominence Point, but let's just say there was. We built the
4-story.
Yeah. So let's look at how many calls do these 5,000 people require a year and how many do these 5,000? And when you do that, the
It's the
numbers,
same.
the number, they're very close. It is increased where they're in closer
But not
proximity.
drastically.
But it's not this, the world's coming to an end because we have high density housing coming. It's just that you have more people in a single area, so there's naturally going to be more calls going there.
And then kind of on that, with high density and property tax.
Yeah.
Does the number of occupants affect the property tax
Per unit?
per unit?
No, if you have a family of one or a family of seven, property tax is on the building, just like your home.
Right. Okay, so then
It's
now,
on the value.
okay, all right, you know, we have
It's not a per person tax.
okay. Okay,
Now, one other thing, since we're talking property taxes for this committee to consider, and sorry, we're getting close to running over time here. With the police department, right? And one of the discussions that we have, I'm gonna ask you a question, Randy, you don't get to answer because I think you know the answer. Okay, but for the rest of you, what percentage of our police department budget? What's the budget this year? 4.1? $4.3 million. What percentage of that is funded by property tax? Now, bear in mind that all of property tax is earmarked for the police department, right?
Mhm.
So what percentage of the police department's budget comes from property
I
tax?
guess we got told that answer last meeting. I don't remember what it was, but it was in the
No, it's 40.
40-some percent.
Yeah, it's like 43, 44%. So what that means is more than half of our police department right now, probably one of the most critical departments we have, aside from water and sewer, right? You don't have a police department, you don't have water, you don't have sewer, you have death.
We got problems.
You don't have.
Right, you have problems. So it's a critical department. Right now, we depend 55, pushing 60% of our department on sales tax. What happens if we have an economic downturn and sales tax? Half of our sales tax comes from Smiths and Lee's, food tax. You've heard in recent years, the
Oh,
state
yeah.
keep talking about taking away the food tax. So imagine if the state did that and took away the local food tax, because there's the state and then there's the local.
Yeah.
So if the state took away the local sales tax on food, we would lose half of our sales tax. So we would now have $2.2 million in property taxes.
And you'd have to go look.
And we have about another $2 million in sales taxes for a city whose police department is $4.3 million. So that gives you, so one of the questions that I'm posing to you and that you'll hear more from me, but I would love for this committee to consider, not today, but think about it, is should we continue as we say we determined we need to add another officer? It's time. Should we rely on the sales tax for that? Or should we increase our property tax? That earmark, the word 100% of it goes to funding the police department. And do that and eventually get to a little bit better balance, maybe 60% property tax for the police department, 40% sales. But we'd have to more than double your property taxes to pay for just the police department, and that's never going to happen, right? That's just not going to happen. But I think we can get to a safer balance. And I do mean safer in the strongest terms. We need to divest as best we can the budget for the police department away from volatile sales tax and unpredictable sales tax. I mean, just think if we hit a monster recession, or the state comes in and says, we're not doing food tax.
Do other cities split it up like we do, or are we kind of unique in that regard?
Some cities like Riverdale, they're 100% sales tax. Riverdale on their budget is $9 or $10 million. You know, 8.5 of it is sales tax. And so but Riverdale is also a perfect example. When RC Willey's pulled out last year, what do you think their sales tax drop was? The hit to the Riverdale city budget just by losing RC Willey's.
10% hit.
Well, dollars. How many dollars do you think?
What was the total dollar?
It was almost $800,000.
That they lose every year because RC really pulled out.
Yeah, and it's a little less than 10%, about 8.5, 9% of their budget.
And that's what funded
like
their-
that when RC Willie said, we're done, we're moving, we're going down to Layton. And so now you've got just to maintain what you're doing, police departments, whatever.
They're scrambling.
They're scrambling, looking for how do we make up those sales dollars?
How do we continue to pay our policemen?
Right, and so they had to do some property tax increases and things like that, but that's just it's a policy question that the council will wrestle with. And wrestles with every year, that balance between property tax and sales tax, and one is more stable, more painful for us as individuals. But there's.
So do we have tracking on that as far as historically,
Yeah,
how much
Yeah.
the property or sales taxes?
back in 2000, property taxes covered 100%, effectively 100% of the cost of our police department. But because it's grown and the costs of having police, the salary competition and everything else. It has continued to escalate. What's that number we looked at today in the last 5 years?
2 million.
2 million, the cost of policing has gone up in the last 5 years. $2 million.
That's why I challenge it too, because it's not that I don't appreciate the police, but because it's such a huge part of our budget. It makes me think, we brag about 2.5 minute response time. But so they're just sitting around waiting for a call. In other words, is that more than we want to pay or more than we can afford to have that kind of, everybody else has 5.5 minutes or 8 minutes. So why are we paying to have 2.5 minutes?
Which is a point that the mayor and I think you made. What are we willing to pay for? What
Yeah.
level of comfort, luxury, if you will?
Yeah.
What are we willing to pay for?
What are you willing to pay for? And the other part of that is, what are you willing to sacrifice?
Right.
When it's your life on the line, Randy, are you willing to wait 6 minutes versus 2.5?
I'm having a heart attack. I won't.
When you're being held at gunpoint and that 911 call goes off. And unbeknownst to you that you've got 4 minutes before that guy pulls the trigger. You've got a choice. You've got a 6 minute response call, you got a 2.5.
I thought about that and I think I'm willing to give up a minute or two.
But keep in mind, those are average numbers
The picture I'm trying to paint.
Yeah, it is. And you don't know the exact answer. to
That's
this
the question that council has to wrestle with.
Right.
Because if I'm the guy that made the decision, we're gonna drop to 20 officers. And I look at the data and a year from now, we're now at 4.5 minute response time versus 2.5 minute, right? And Randy Wynn gets held up at Parker Park. And we look at the 911 call that comes in at 9.
I'm looking at my watch.
9:22 PM.
I'll be here any second.
And at 9:26 and 30 seconds, Randy gets shot.
Yeah.
Because an officer wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
And I know that if I had those other 2 officers, if we hadn't made that reduction and we were still at that 2.5 minute response time, Randy would probably still be alive.
It's like insurance, how high do you want your deductible?
It is.
Yeah, and if you want it real low, you better be willing to pay for it.
I'm just sharing with you what we go through in making that decision. We're playing out.
And I don't criticize your decision. I'm just wondering as a city,
There's
whether
an
we want to
element
rethink this.
that's punishment, catching the criminal and punishing them too is the deterrence element. That's more than just the police. It's also, the city attorney and the prosecutors and all that too.
Well, and the prosecutors and the crime stats across the country will all tell you the same thing, that what's the #1 crime deterrent? The #1 crime deterrent.
Visible police.
Visible police. When the potential perpetrators, they'll look at a community, if you never see a cop, those are the communities that they're going to, in communities like North Ogden. And we don't have a lot out on the streets at any one given time, but you got 24/7, that you have to man. Seeing those police officers out and they're making those calls and they have the moment where there's a group of kids at the park and they just, hey guys, what's going on? Can I shoot some hoops with you? What those kids remember is that we're out here and we think that we're alone and nobody can see us, but oh, no, the police officer saw us.
Is to see the patrol drive up the street.
That's right, and it really does, that's a huge part in making a community safe, and I've taken up too much of your time here.
Also,
No problem. I would like to. Thank you, by the way. I've enjoyed this discussion and I'm gonna freely admit something. I put that target of an hour and a half. Just because I thought we needed to have some kind of a goal. I think it's a good goal. You know, I know what last week or last meeting was. And so it was kind of arbitrary, but kind of in good conscience that I thought we need to shoot for something. I appreciate your bearing with us. Not that I'm faulting anything here. Thank you for your time, everybody. Are there any questions on yellow sheets? That's an item on the agenda, but I think we've already talked about sufficiently.
I just had one question. Go there. The question is on overall, you know, because there's lines for each. On the yellow sheet, there's kind of the same thing. I mean, is the discussion that we're gonna have about consolidation or if you're buying the same thing as, you know, each department responsible for it, or as opposed to just talking about each department, is there a time that we can talk about combining things or, you know, like.
Is that a question that could be asked when
Well,
Espinosa is
I
here?
think the answer is yes, once we've gone through the individual departments. And then that's a great time for those questions of, okay, well, I've noticed that this department, that department, that department all buy this thing.
Mhm.
Are we consolidating and using scale and those kinds of things in order to get the best pricing? Are we doing that? And the answer is yes. The short answer is yes, we do that, but that's a great opportunity for you to ask those kinds of questions. Once we've gone through all of the
Like, does
individual
the
departments.
city have a cost?
I think we do know the cost. Maybe we don't. I think we do. We do not. But that is a question that we've been asking recently, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a policy question.
A policy
Note it
question
down right there.
that fits with that. To think about for that point is, do we buy local? Or do we buy where it costs the least?
Which you talked about the red disc Dixie cups.
Right, and then your example was the.
Well, it depends on if they are actually still buying local. Or if they are going to buy where it costs the least. If they're going to buy where it costs the least anyway, then we get the Costco membership. So it depends
That's a
on.
great question for you all.
Okay, hang on to those questions.
All right,
Let's ask.
hanging on.
Anything else? Any go backs before we call it a day?
I would like to know who, well, what yellow sheets and what department head is gonna come next time? Do you know yet?
That's what Sandy and I and John are gonna figure
Oh,
out.
okay, sorry.
So we do have the council schedule. So the next group will likely be enterprise, which is all your monthly utility bills. And the admin, which is the departments in this building. And Sandy and Doug and I will talk about those because we might have a chance to get two groups in before that next council meeting. Although
Mhm.
one would just be a week before.
Do we three have time to have that whole decision-making discussion right after this is done?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
But
And then you'll send something to Randy and he'll.
Yep.
Okay, so you should know fairly soon,
Okay,
right?
very good. So we've answered that. Anybody else had a question, comment, complaint? Sir, you joined us a little later. Are you the average citizen wondering what's going on or you're?
No,
What's your name?
I'm Bryce Nelson. I'm the Administrative Services Manager and Treasurer.
Oh, that's right. You're the Bryce that I forgot. Okay.
the Bryce.
Always.
Can we get a name tag?
I've already ordered it.
Bryce. So 12 minutes till 5, according to that clock. I think it's my job to say thank you very much. Unless there's anything.
We meet two Wednesdays from now then?
2 Wednesdays from now, that decision was made. It'll be documented in the minutes. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.
Sweet.